Now that we've talked about the environmental factor of water, let's talk about topography and vegetation of ancient India. First topographical feature is the Deccan Plateau. The Deccan Plateau is a triangle-shaped area that lies between two mountain ranges, the Eastern and Western Ghats, on southern India. A plateau is an elevated or raised area of land that is flatter than a mountain. So we talked about this. Think about it as a mountain with its top cut off. The plateau is fairly dry. There are a few rivers, but the monsoon rains provide most of the water. So people can live here, but they have to rely on the monsoons, which can make living here very difficult. The soil on the plateau is black, yellow, or red. Black soil is rich in iron, good for growing cotton. Yellow and red soils lack key minerals, so they're not very good to grow crops. The Deccan Plateau has several kinds of land. In the flatter parts, large granite rocks formed by volcanoes cover the land. These rocks are among the world's oldest, dating back more than 600 million years. The hillier parts of the plateau have thin forest and low scrubby bushes. So that's a little about the vegetation of the Deccan Plateau. As you can see it here on the map, it's highlighted for you in the southern tip between the two mountain ranges along the coast. As you can see, the vegetation here is pretty scarce and not so ideal for farming. Okay, so next we have our Western and Eastern Ghats. These are long mountain chains near the coasts of India. The Deccan Plateau, as we just mentioned, lies right between them. They form a large V on the southern tip of the subcontinent. The Western Ghats are higher than the Eastern Ghats. The Western Ghats have steep slopes, narrow valleys, thick hardwood forests, and extremely heavy rains. So the wet climate encourages the growth of tropical plants. The Eastern Ghats are not as wet as the Western Ghats. Several rivers flow through these green mountains, which are dotted with hardwood trees. But the rivers rarely flood. However, because they move so quickly, they are unsafe for travel. They also contain many rocks and plunge suddenly off cliffs. So let's take a look here. We have our Western and our Eastern Ghats. And as you can see here, we have some of the vegetation. Right here we have the Eastern Ghat river sources, which, as we mentioned, are pretty unsafe for travel. As you can see, you wouldn't want to be riding down those waters. Okay, now let's talk about the mountains, the northern mountains. First, we have the Himalaya Mountains. As I mentioned, highest mountain range in the world, and it creates a majority of the northern border of India. The range is composed of 20 mountains that are over 24,000 feet high. That's pretty high. The Himalayas live up to their name, which means home of snows. The highest peaks are always covered in snow and ice. Fierce storms can dump 10 feet of snow on the area at one time. Water from the glaciers of the Himalayan mountains feeds most of northern India's major rivers. Underneath the Himalaya mountains, the earth is constantly moving. This movement causes the mountains to rise slightly every year. It also makes earthquakes and landslides common in the area. So, from a living perspective, probably not the best place to settle. Also in the north, we have the Hindu Kush Mountains. These mountains form a rugged barrier between India, the Indus River Valley, and Afghanistan. The mountain range is not as tall as the Himalayas, but is still one of the highest in the world. Some of the peaks are almost 5 miles high. Many parts of the range are unlivable. It's very rugged terrain, and snow and ice permanently cover the steep slopes and peaks. The Khyber Pass forms a gap about 30 miles long in the mountains on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The pass connects central India to the Indian subcontinent. So, for thousands of years, traders used this pass to enter the Indus River Valley. Invaders also used the pass, but many died in the mountains because of the unforgiving landscape. As you see here, we have our mountain ranges, and these are the Himalayas right over here. You could see the Khyber Pass that goes through the Hindu Kush Mountains. Okay, our last feature the Thar Desert. This is a massive area in northern India, which is mostly sand and stone. Huge rolling sand dunes stretch for hundreds of miles. The landscape is littered with rocks, and there is very little plant life except for grass and low hardy shrubs. So most of the time, the heat is unbearable. Water is a very precious resource in the desert, and rain is rare, but the monsoons do occasionally bring some water. So the dry conditions make dust storms common, but some animals are able to live. While we have little vegetation, many types of lizards and snakes, as well as birds and gazelles, can survive in the Thar Desert. Here we have a look. You can see it here on the map. This very large span of land on the northwestern part. Okay. So, we just talked about all of the 5 main topographical features and the vegetation. I've summarized the vegetation here for you again. Might take a minute and jot some of these down to keep it simple. Okay, so ancient India, where to settle? Topography was an important factor for early settlers. As we discussed with the other civilizations, farmers usually settled in large flat open areas. So that made the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which we said was the extensive north-central section of the Indian subcontinent that stretched from the Brahmaputra and Ganges River to the Indus River Valley. Very ideal for settlement. This region contains the subcontinent's richest and most densely populated area. Like many ancient people, the first people in India chose to settle near rivers because the rivers provided plenty of water, fertile soil, and could be used for travel and trade. So, it's all about location, location, location. The first known settlements in India were in the Indus River Valley. There were farming communities as early as 6500 BCE. By 5000 BCE, people lived near the Ganges River, and by 2500 BCE, there were settlements along the Indus River Valley. The geography of India greatly influenced the location of early settlements on the subcontinent. The rivers carried rich silt from the mountains to the plains. And when the rivers flooded, they spread the silt over the banks, making the land fertile for farming. Over time, civilizations developed and flourished. Okay, so you've almost made it. We're at our summary. Here's my attempt at summarizing everything that we just reviewed. It was a lot of information. Like many ancient peoples, the first people in India chose to settle near rivers. The rivers provided plenty of water, fertile soil, ideal for farming, and the capability to travel and trade. The 3 main rivers of the Indian subcontinent carried silt from the mountains to the plains. When the rivers flooded from the monsoons, the silt spread over the plains and made the soil in the river valleys fertile for farming. The first known settlements of ancient Egypt were in the Indus River Valley. These were farming communities that began as early as 6500 BCE. By 5000 BCE, people lived near the Ganges River. By 2500 BCE, walled settlements sprouted on the Indo-Gangetic Plain. The geography of India greatly influenced the location of early settlements on the subcontinent. By having the mountains at the north and water on the southern sides, the early settlements of India were isolated from other people, which causes civilizations to develop their own unique cultures. Whew! Okay, it's even more of a mouthful than our last unit. But you made it through. So again, thanks for doing your homework, and I will see you in class.